The crazy times with Jack and Eddie continue. Chapter 5. Golf, fender benders, baseball, and a brothel. Jack and Eddie loved sports. Perhaps this was because they both grew up with sibling rivalry, each with two brothers. The pecking order, though, was different. Jack's brothers, Dave and Bo, were younger than he, but the three of them were separated in age by a total of less than 3 years. Because he was the oldest, he always had an advantage when it came to competition, though he continually had to prove his dominance to maintain the natural order. Eddie was younger than his brothers, which spurred him to overachievement, always trying harder because of the age disadvantage. The roles that Jack and Eddie played in each of their families complemented their rivalry and served to foster athletic competition between them whenever the opportunity arose. Jack arrived an hour and a half late at Eddie's broken-down apartment to pick Eddie up for a game of golf. This was typical for Jack, as he didn't live on a schedule of any kind. He just as well could have shown up at 4:30 in the morning to wake Eddie from a deep slumber. This was by no means habit for Jack, just a way of life. Eddie had been living here since he'd split with Mary a month earlier, and Jack's companionship provided him much-needed solace from the fresh wounds of the breakup. Jack pulled a can out of a brown paper sack, popped open a cold pint of Coors, and offered it to Eddie. Never mind that it was 9:30 in the morning. They were just excited to spend the day together, golfing at Kicking Eagle, their favorite golf course. Jack had introduced Eddie to the game of golf a couple of years earlier, and they played whenever they could scrape together the funds to do so. So after loading their golf clubs and beer cooler into the back of Jack's Nissan pickup, they headed to the course with beers in hand. It was a gloriously warm, early September day at Kicking Eagle, a plush course in the north suburbs of Oklahoma City. They'd played the course countless times, sometimes playing from dawn to dusk on the longest of summer days here. And as they unloaded their golf clubs in the half-empty parking lot, they discussed the possibility of playing multiple rounds this day, high on the prospect of an uncrowded course. The first tee was open, and after they paid their green fees, they hurried to the tee box where Jack pulled out his Persimmon Powerbuilt driver and began warming up. He was proud of how far he could drive the ball with this driver, which he'd gotten from an old Navy friend named Frank. Eddie gestured for Jack to play first, so he pulled a ball and a tee from his pocket and planted it firmly into the sod just inside the right tee marker. He took his stance and settled over the ball, lining up for a high fade shot down the left side of the fairway. A long pause followed before he drew the club back and heaved a mighty swing at the defenseless ball as it sat poised to rocket off its wooden perch. He caught it squarely and exactly, with perfect trajectory as the ball screamed down the left side of the fairway before settling dead center almost 300 yards from the tee. "I hit that right in the pussy." Jack reached for a Marlboro and lit it excitedly, inhaling deeply as if to reward himself for the perfect stroke he'd just executed. Eddie chuckled with amazement as he planted his tee in the ground and balanced his ball on top. He took a deep breath to steady himself, hoping to produce a carbon copy of what he had just witnessed. He drew the club back and flailed wildly at the white sphere, and as the club made contact, the ball launched low and straight. It was the kind of hot line drive that would have given an infielder fits in a baseball game, and its momentum carried it down the low-cut fairway, coming to rest at a respectable position 40 yards short of Jack's ball. "Caught that on the heel there a little, didn't you, Eddie?" Jack said with a little gamesmanship in his voice. They gathered their bags and walked down the fairway together, sipping their beer and happy to have had an auspicious start to their round. From a mental standpoint, there is no more important shot in golf than the first, because it sets the tone for a good round or a bad one. The legendary golfer Bobby Jones got it right when he said that golf is played on a 5-inch course, the distance between your ears. Golf is also unique in that there is no defense against your opponent. The player is playing against the course, and at the end of the round, he who has made the fewest strokes wins. Jack and Eddie arrived at Eddie's ball. It was a perfect lie with 145 yards to the pin. Eddie pulled an 8-iron from his bag, but after judging the breeze in his face, he opted for a 7-iron. He took a couple of practice swings, settled over the ball, and swung. The ball jumped off the turf, and a perfect divot followed. It started dead on the pin, unwavering as it continued toward the flag, and as the ball hit the green, it took a couple of hops and ended 6 feet short of the hole. It was a thing of beauty. Nice! Jack appreciated the shot, as all golfers do. Eddie smiled coyly, well aware of how good the shot was. The pressure was squarely on Jack now, knowing that he would have to match it. Jack figured his distance at 106 yards into the wind, choosing a pitching wedge from his bag. He tossed his cigarette on the turf at his feet and began his pre-shot routine. He took a practice swing, then another. He looked at his ball, then to the flag, then back to his ball, before he stood motionless, addressing the ball, pouring every ounce of thought and planning into making the shot. He stood there for at least 10 seconds before starting his backswing, coiling, and then releasing the club down the swing path. When the club made contact, it made a sweet click, the kind of click that only produces amazing shots. And as the two of them watched the flight of the ball, they stood there silent, unable to utter anything until the outcome of the shot became apparent. It was as if the shot was in slow motion as the ball hit once, then hit the flagstick before careening hard across the green and into the greenside bunker. Jack's disappointment was immediately obvious. Bullshit! Did you see that flagstick fuck me? Jack was livid. He had hit a perfect shot with disastrous results. Without saying a word, he slammed his wedge into his bag and stomped angrily toward the green, leaving Eddie in his wake. He didn't even pick up his smoldering cigarette that he'd been happily puffing all the way up the fairway. Eddie was well acquainted with this type of behavior from Jack, and he'd found that the best way to deal with it was just to stay quiet. He'd tried a lighthearted, affable approach in the past, but it usually served to fuel his anger. Because Eddie knew this, he'd sometimes use it to his advantage when such a circumstance occurred, if the match was close. But this time, he gave Jack a wide berth and approached the green from the opposite side of the bunker that had trapped Jack's ball. When he arrived, Jack was already addressing his ball in the sand. This was another bad golf habit that Jack exhibited on multiple occasions. When he hit a bad shot, he'd forget to think at all about his next shot, as if by not thinking about it, a better result would be produced. Perhaps he was just ready to give up on the hole entirely and go on to the next one. Whichever was the case, the outcome was always the same: bad. He took a full swing from the bunker, but all Eddie saw was a cloud of sand. More cursing followed, and another quick swing moved the ball to the edge of the green. Jack stomped out of the bunker without even raking it, as he snatched his putter from his bag and marched to his ball. He was on full tilt now, and all golf etiquette was supplanted with a brutal determination to simply finish the hole. 3 putts later, he picked up his ball without ever holing it. Eddie was crouching behind his ball, pretending not to have borne witness to the events that had just transpired. He had suspended eye contact with Jack ever since he had first entered the bunker, so as not to inflame the situation any further. He dropped his gaze momentarily to gather himself before he rose to concentrate on making his putt. It was a straight 6 feet to the hole, and when he stroked the putt, the ball glided across the turf and disappeared into the hole with a satisfying rattle. "I'll mark you down for a 7. Eddie said consolingly as they walked toward the next hole. Mark me down for whatever the fuck you want to. Give me a fucking X. I fucking suck at golf. Jack was beside himself as he reached for another cigarette from his golf pants. He thought to himself how he had taught Eddie this goddamn game, and that he rarely won when they played. It was a cruel irony for him, almost overwhelming at times. This day would be no different, and as the round continued, it was much the same. As they walked off the 18th green, Eddie added up the score. Hey, I broke 80 for the first time, a 78. You had a 93, Jack. Let's get a cold one in the clubhouse. I'll buy. Eddie didn't have much disposable money, but figured another beer might help to brighten Jack's sour mood. They entered the clubhouse and drank 2 or 3, talking about the game they both loved, making plans for the rest of the day. Jack's jovial spirit had returned, and he suggested that they go to the baseball game. His father had season tickets to the Oklahoma City 89ers games, the AAA affiliate team of the Texas Rangers. They had attended countless games together and always had a good time when they went. I got to go by and get the tickets from my dad's typewriter shop. I'll drive you by your apartment, then you can meet me at the game at about 7. The shop was in Middledale, a suburb on the eastern side of the city, a good 35 minutes out of the way. They grabbed their clubs and shuffled out to the parking lot in the warm late afternoon sun before loading up and heading back to Eddie's shanty. See you at 7. Eddie waved to Jack as he pulled out of the gravel parking lot and onto the street that fronted the old apartment building Eddie was now calling home. He walked up the creaky wooden stairs to his door and stepped inside. It was times like these, when he was left alone with himself, that his thoughts would drift to Mary. He wondered what she was doing and who she was with, and if it was just the alcohol making him feel this way. If he'd had a telephone, he might very well have called her up at that moment. Instead, he went to the refrigerator and pulled out the only thing in it, a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, and sat down on his old couch to drink it. He'd known for a long time that he and Mary were headed to the exact point in time where they found themselves now. But as was all too often the case, the longing for female companionship left him feeling incomplete with a need for fulfillment. He tipped his beer up and finished it in 3 gulps before heading out the front door of his wretched apartment, leaving his troubled thoughts behind him as he stumbled into his Monte Carlo to make the drive into the city. The service road to the interstate seemed rather deserted for the time of day it was, as he steered the car onto the bridge overpass that crossed the highway. As he neared the access road on the other side, out of nowhere, an older car entered his field of view from the right. He applied the brakes hard to avert a crash, but it was already too late. The car passed in front of him, and the Monte Carlo slid into the driver's side front fender of the other car. It was as if the moment stretched out, nearly frozen in time, before all was quiet and the vehicles were at rest. Eddie's first thought was whether he had run a stop sign, but it was clear that the stop sign was on the access road traffic, though the other vehicle never began braking. He looked over at the driver of the other car before stepping out onto the pavement. It was a middle-aged lady, somewhat shaken, but attempting to get out of her car, apparently unhurt. As she opened her door, Eddie spoke. "Didn't you see the stop sign?" As he asked the question, he smelled his own breath, reeking of alcohol. He looked at the arrangement of the cars. He'd always been told that the vehicle that was hit was usually the innocent party, and it was obvious that his car had hit hers. He wondered how this scenario might hold up in a court of law, even though he had the right of way. As she stepped from her car, he made certain to stand downwind from her, in order to keep a variable like alcohol consumption out of the equation. They stood there together, surveying the wreckage. The Monte Carlo appeared undamaged, but her car didn't fare as well, sustaining a large dent in the front fender. They wondered what to do. "Should we exchange insurance cards?" The lady seemed well-meaning. Eddie certainly didn't want any cops to show up, but he didn't want to give his name either. He knew something had to be done quickly before some well-meaning soul showed up to help. His mind raced for a quick solution, and it came to him in a flash. Yes, we should exchange insurance cards. There's no phone here to call the police, but there is a police station just down this road. It's about a mile down this road on the right. I say we go down there and fill out the papers. It's obvious whose fault this is, so it shouldn't take too long. Eddie had no idea if there was a police station there or not, but he knew he had to get the vehicles moving before he was arrested for driving under the influence. The lady seemed a bit reluctant, but her options seemed limited. It's down this road on the right? Should I follow you down there? She was still unsure about the plan. Yeah, it's about a mile down on the right. No, I'll follow you. Don't go too fast and lose me now. We'll get it all straightened out shortly. Eddie was as believable as any villain ever was. The two got into their cars, and Eddie backed the Monte Carlo away from her vehicle without a problem. He feared that her car might not even start, but it did, and she pulled out in front of him and started down the road away from the interstate. Eddie pulled out slowly, but as she continued west, he turned left onto the interstate access ramp and pushed the accelerator to the floor, disappearing into a sea of cars headed south into the city. He wondered if she had had a chance to get his tag number, but he was fairly certain that she didn't. Exhilaration coursed through him as he drove, thankful that such a random chain of bad events played out in his favor. His deception gnawed at him a little, but he rationalized that the accident was not his fault anyway, so why should he be held accountable for a technicality that had nothing to do with the accident? The logic of it all elicited a chuckle as he pulled into the stadium parking lot and pulled up alongside Jack's pickup underneath the designated elm tree where they always parked. Jack was sitting on his tailgate with beer in hand. Eddie joined him, and the two of them drank beer as Eddie recounted what had just happened to him. Feedback from Jack about the accident was positive, and it alleviated some of Eddie's guilt about it. The fresh beer also helped in that regard, and after a couple, they walked into the stadium together. Their seats were ideal, a few rows up, halfway between third base and home plate, facing east away from the setting sun that could be so annoying at that time of day. They were on the first row of the second section up, which was ideal for concessions, as the beer cart made regular runs on the concourse just in front of them. It was a good spot from which to people watch, too, as young, buxom girls sporting tube tops and short shorts passed by frequently, adding to the spectacle of America's pastime. Cold beer here! Cold beer here! Right on cue, the beer man approached, pushing a 30-gallon trash can on wheels, filled with ice and domestic varieties of beer. He was an ancient black man, well into his 80s, whom everybody called Abner, a fixture at the '89 games, having been employed there longer than anyone could remember. He had hair that was purely gray, in stark contrast to his dark skin, and he was dressed in clothes most would associate with a homeless person. As he drew closer, he yelled again, in a strong southern, toothless drawl. Cold beer here! Cold beer here! Jack signaled him by hoisting a $5 bill and waving it in his direction. The old man stopped the cart in front of them, and Jack ordered 2 Coors Light beers. Abner dipped his gnarled hand deep into the ice and plucked out 2 cans and opened them, tremulously pouring the contents into styrofoam cups without spilling a drop before handing them to Jack and Eddie. He avoided eye contact, but was acutely aware of everything around him. Smoke from Jack's cigarette wafted towards him. Bill'll kill you. So would those smokes. I's 82 years old. I just keeps on dancing. Never drank, never smoked. Young people don't ever think ahead, don't ever think about their health. Abner ignored Jack's money momentarily, bursting into a little tap dance, eliciting laughter and clapping from several of the fans. He carried on for more than a minute, soaking up the much-deserved attention he was earning from the crowd. He finally stopped, a bit out of breath, but smiled appreciatively in response to the applause, showing only 2 yellow teeth. He took Jack's money and pushed the cart steadily on down the concourse, knowing that he would do business with Jack and Eddie several times before the night was over. A sharp crack off the bat of Tommy Dunbar brought the stadium faithful to their feet, and he trotted around the bases for a walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth. The crowd had thinned dramatically, but those that had remained were witness to an exciting ending to an otherwise lackluster game. Jack and Eddie made their way out of the stadium, stumbling a few times due to the excessive alcohol they had consumed. As they approached their vehicles, Jack posed a question for Eddie's consideration. "Hey, I know this place up on 39th and May. It's an escort service I've been to a few times. Want to go?" Eddie didn't really understand the term escort service, but from the look on Jack's face, he supposed it was akin to a whorehouse, though he had never been to either one. The mention of it filled his head with vivid imagery of naked women engaging in carnal activities that he'd been without since he and Mary had called it quits. Primal urges swelled within him as he thought about it and cultivated his curiosity. "Well, how much does it cost?" Eddie knew he didn't have any money, at least not the kind of money he figured it would take for a woman to shed her clothes for him. "Don't worry, I got a Visa card. They take Visa cards there. I'll buy." Jack was notorious for his lack of concern when it came to credit cards, and Eddie remembered collection bureaus calling him at Methodist Hospital seeking payments for outstanding bills. Jack was always in debt, probably due to the exact sort of purchase they were now contemplating. Jack could see Eddie's vacillation, so he made the decision for him. "Get in." The two hopped into Jack's pickup and began the drive over to the brothel. Eddie didn't say much, still wrestling with the semantics of the term escort service. He wondered how such a business could fly so far under the radar of the authorities, sparking visions of himself on the 6 o'clock news, showing him being escorted away naked in handcuffs by police officers, while the reporter talked about a raid on a local escort service and mandatory jail time. The thought of it was enough to send a visible shudder through him and serve to restore him back to reality. Jack killed the engine as he pulled up in front of a nondescript building. There was no name on it at all, causing Eddie to wonder how anyone would even know about it. Butterflies filled his stomach now, though he wasn't sure if it was excitement that he was feeling. Jack hopped out and started up the walk to the door, and Eddie reluctantly followed close behind. The room inside was much like the foyer of a restaurant, dimly lit, with a podium positioned at the entry. The two were immediately met there by a pretty blonde with a very nice figure. Eddie noticed a waiting area with several folding chairs, many of which were occupied by beefy women reading fashion magazines. "We'd like to purchase the services of 2 of your girls," Jack said in a rather professional tone. Eddie mused how Jack's statement was preferable to, "I'm drunk and I want to fuck," though he had no paradigm for brothel etiquette. The madam smiled. "Sure, just pick out who you want." She gestured to the herd of semen reservoirs seated in the waiting area, none of which could be considered alluring. Jack replied without hesitation, "How about you?" It was obvious that the madam was the only choice, and it verified Eddie's hunch that Jack had already faced this decision on prior occasions. Eddie wondered if there were other options, or if there were prettier girls already conducting business in one of the back rooms. But the prospect of sloppy seconds held no more appeal to him than choosing from among the pool of heifers that sat before him. The butterflies in his stomach were really flapping their wings now. Okay, will it be cash or credit? She said it like a department store cashier. I got a Visa. I'll pay for both of us. Jack handed the card to the madam. Great. Come with me. She grabbed Jack by the arm and started toward the back, motioning to Eddie as they exited the room. Just pick out anyone. Eddie took a couple of tenuous steps forward and surveyed the choices. There were 7 women, none of whom appeared too eager to be chosen. He looked at each one briefly, trying to disguise his reluctance to choose any of them at all. They were all overweight, with bleach blonde hair, unremarkable in appearance, and each appearing to have lived a very hard life. They were products of a society who had turned their backs on them, relegated to live a life without morals or conscience, or someone to love them. Eddie's mind raced as he searched himself for a decision, but he was completely overwhelmed. Finally, without any regard for the reasons why, he pointed to the girl closest to him, and she took him by the hand and led him out of the room. They walked down a narrow hall past rooms on either side until they came to the last room on the left. She opened the door, revealing a sterile-looking room. There was nothing adorning the walls, nor was there a fixture on the overhead light. Just a bed with white sheets and a folding chair sitting on peel-and-stick floor tiling. She got down to business without even introducing herself. Okay, what do you want? Here are the prices. $40 for a hand job, $60 for a blow job, and $100 for anything you want. What's it going to be? She said it matter-of-factly, without emotion, in a business-as-usual tone. Her forthright manner caught Eddie off guard. Well, I guess a blowjob. It certainly appeared to be the option that afforded the most bang for Jack's buck. Well, okay. Take your clothes off and I'll be back in a minute. She left the room and closed the door behind her, leaving Eddie alone to undress. As he slowly untied his tennis shoes, he heard talking in the next room, but he couldn't make out what was being said. But he knew it wasn't the sound of lovemaking. He pulled his shirt over his head, wondering whether he should put it on the bed or on the floor. He opted for the bed, and after he shed his pants, he sat down in nothing but his briefs next to his clothes on the side of the bed and waited. The adrenaline flowed freely now, coursing through his veins like 1,000 locomotives. His heart was leaping from his chest as it had never done before, and he stared at the closed door, dreading the events that would transpire when it opened and shut again. He looked over his clothes on the bed, and he thought about getting dressed and leaving. And just as he was deciding, the door creaked open, and the bleach blonde heifer stood in the doorway. Get your clothes on. Your buddy's Visa ain't no good. Her words sunk in slowly, but the relief they provided spread over him quickly. With renewed vigor, he pulled on his clothes and hastily tied his shoes. He walked down the narrow corridor back to the waiting room where Jack was already waiting. The two said nothing until they were outside, but Jack spoke first. Buddy, you chose the ugliest one. If I'm paying for it, you could at least choose one that was halfway decent. Eddie smiled indifferently to Jack's judgment of his taste in women, simply thankful that Jack's card had reached its limit. Jack drove back to the empty stadium parking lot and dropped Eddie off at his Monte Carlo. It had been an eventful day for them both, and as Eddie drove to the north suburbs, he realized that his friendship with Jack would endure throughout his lifetime. End section 3.